Hi everybody, I'm Greg Fishel. Welcome to bonus weather video number 3 for the week, and we're doing it one day early, or I am, because of the fact that this is the 40th anniversary of one of the most noteworthy tornado outbreaks in the history of North Carolina that occurred on March 28th of 1984. I will make this available to all subscribers because I think it's that important to go over it. There's no need to exclude anybody from looking back at this horrific and yet historical event. So let's go on ahead, and I'll put myself down here in the corner so you can see most of the screen. And March 28th of 1984, there were a number of, at that time, F3 and F4 tornadoes. That scale has been modified to the Enhanced Fujieda Scale, or EF now, where they actually did quite a bit of research in terms of what types of wind speeds caused what types of damage. But back then, it was F3s and F4s, and the wind speeds were estimated to be as high as 207 to 260 miles per hour. And you can see the labels here. This was an F4, 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 F3, then a 4, a 3, and a 4. And there were some other weaker ones, still significant, but not quite as strong as these up here to the north and east. And after this event was over, I used to be off on Monday and Tuesdays, and sometimes I would go down to Wrightsville Beach. And back then there was no 40. And so I would go down Highway 70 to Goldsboro and then catch 117 and head south to Wilmington. And there's a little community called Calypso just south of Goldsboro that was just absolutely devastated by this outbreak. And I remember going down there, parking the car, and getting out and going up to one of the many workers that were trying to help clean up the area. And I remember just asking him very honestly, I said, I don't want to be a gawker, but I said, I've never seen anything like this before firsthand. I've seen it on TV from places where it's happened elsewhere, but I've never seen it, with my own eyes. And do you mind if I just look around without getting in anybody's way? And he said, absolutely. And I saw the normal things you hear about, like, an entire room gone and a toilet, untouched, and, that type of thing. But it was just a real eye-opener for me to see something like that was that bad, that close up. Now, this is not for the purposes of bragging. It's just a fact that the day before this event, I was talking on TV, and I was doing the morning and the noon show back then, about how concerned I was about a major severe weather outbreak. Now, I did not specifically say a tornado outbreak, but when I saw this that you're looking at on your screen right now, this is what scared me. And I'll make a humble admission in just a second. But basically, these are the 300 millibar wind speeds at 4 p.m. on March 28, just before the tornadoes started to hit North Carolina. And these darker reds here are sustained wind speeds of 150 knots, which is about 170 miles an hour. And you know how we talk about jet streaks, a band within the jet stream where the wind is blowing faster than it is anywhere else? Well, this was quite a strong one right here. And the nose of it was aimed just to the south of most of North Carolina, which put us in the left exit region, which is a favorable region for upward motion. And when I saw that, I had seen this pattern in the plains, but I had never seen it in the southeast. And so that's why I got so excited about it. But as it turns out, and the interesting thing about this is that Bill Schmidt, who was working with me that day, we both won a National American Meteorological Society award for this particular outbreak for two reasons. And the less significant one was, I think, the fact that I, called people's attention to the fact that this could be a bad event. But more importantly, the National Weather Service's transmission tower was knocked out down around Maxton and Red Springs when the first tornadoes hit, and they had no way of getting warnings out the way they normally did. This was the NOAA weather radio transmitter, and so they knew that we had a statewide radio network, the North Carolina News Network, that had 90 stations in it all across the state. And so Bob Mueller, who was the meteorologist in charge, back then at that time would literally call us at WRAL every time they issued a warning because they knew that we could get it out through the radio network, whereas they couldn't get it out through their normal means because the transmission tower had been knocked out. And so the American Meteorological Society was nice enough to give us an award for cooperating with the National Weather Service to get that critical information out as soon as we could. But I was looking at this, and back at that time, you got to remember, I'm only 5 years out of school at this point. I know a lot about the large-scale environment, but I don't know that much about the mesoscale environment. And I later learned that, looking at this here, that yes, that helped the large-scale environment to be favorable, but this wasn't the reason that there was a tornado outbreak, okay? And so we're going to talk about that now. Okay, now, that afternoon, I was hand plotting a weather map, and one of the stations that I plotted was Athens, Georgia. And it was about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I looked at the code and the observation, and it had, I think, slightly over a 10 millibar pressure fall in 3 hours. I assumed it was a mistake. It was not a mistake. It was real, okay? So here you're looking at a timeline from 7 a.m. that morning to 6 p.m. in the evening, and the pressure is in millibars there in the second column. The third column is the 1 hour pressure change, and then the wind direction and the wind speed, and the wind speed is in knots. So once we get to noon, the pressure is 991.1, it's barely changing. And then by 1, it drops over 3 millibars. The next hour, it drops over 3 again. The next hour, it drops over 4. And the next hour, it drops over almost 3. And then it begins to recover again. And notice the wind gust there to 56 knots at 4 o'clock. And then the pressure started to recover after that. So between noon and 4, the pressure dropped 13.6 millibars. And that is the same as your home barometer falling 0.4 of an inch of mercury in a 4-hour period. And if you have a home barometer and you look at it fairly regularly, you know that that needle was moving a whole lot and pretty fast for it to drop that much in that amount of time. And at 2 p.m. that afternoon, the temperature at Greensboro was 49, and at Fayetteville it was 81. So you knew something was going on. All right, here is the review of the visible satellite imagery here, and I'm going to put this into motion, and I want to call something to your attention. Let's see here. Oh, I got to do it up here. Hold on. Come on. There we go. All right. Now, this is at 10:45 in the morning. I want you to notice this. You notice how there are cumulus clouds developing down in here across southern South Carolina, but to the north of that, it's perfectly clear. There was a big batch of thunderstorms that came through the night before and laid down what we called an outflow boundary, where cool air descended out of the thunderstorm and acts like a little bit of a mini cold front, okay? Not cold, but relatively cool, stable air. So there were no cumulus clouds forming in here. There were cumulus clouds forming here, and this boundary that you see right in here is where this small-scale low-pressure area formed in Georgia, which we saw because of the big pressure falls at Athens, and that meso-low, if you will, moved along that boundary into southeastern North Carolina and then went up toward the northeastern part of the state, and that is the mechanism that spawned the tornadoes. What I was looking at was the large-scale environment, the wind speeds at 300 millibars, and that set up the big picture, but nothing would have happened beyond maybe some downbursts and some hail unless this happened, where the outflow boundary got laid down by the thunderstorms the night before, and then a meso-low formed along that boundary, and as it moved along it and intensified, that's what spawned the tornadoes. So that was an eye-opener for me, a big lesson that the small scale really, really matters. Okay, and then you can see toward the end of the loop these big thunderstorms before it got dark. Now, if you want to take a look at the infrared imagery, let's go on ahead and do that here. And remember, the colors represent, the temperature of the clouds. So the colder the clouds, then the higher up those clouds are. And if we do this one more time here, I'm going to try to pause this right when the activity was starting to blow up. Right? Oh boy, I guess I can't pause it. Let me go back here one more time. Let's see here. Okay, there it paused. Okay. Okay, see that right there? That's where the first beginning of it was, and that was at 2:30 in the afternoon. And then you can watch that area expand, and you start to get those little orange cold cloud tops there and some yellows just about ready to move into North Carolina, and that would be at 6:30 that evening. These were the 2 p.m. temperatures that afternoon. 49 at Winston-Salem, 69 at RDU, 81 at Fayetteville. And so there was a lot of cold air up here in Virginia, and they actually ended up getting a pretty big snowstorm up north, even though it was late March. And so there was quite a boundary there between the cool air and the very warm air to the south and east. Here is the isobar pattern starting at 4 o'clock that afternoon, and this is what we call a reanalysis. And so it's not really high resolution, and so a little bit of the detail is missing here. But I want you to notice how these isobars are fairly tightly packed down in here, and then they sort of spread out a little bit. And so the outflow boundary was right in this area here, right where the isobars begin to spread out. And this was the beginning of the mesolow down in here. Now we move on ahead to 7 o'clock, and this low was actually a little farther north than that at this point. It was probably up in here, and you can sort of see where the isobars bend here. You can see exactly where this thing was headed, right up toward Maxton and Red Springs, and then eventually just south of Fayetteville and over into Salemburg. And then by 10 o'clock, the mesolow was beginning to move into North Carolina with a very sharp curvature of the isobars right in here, and Raleigh is actually up in here. So all of this activity went just south of the triangle. And then finally, by 1 a.m., everything was over, and the storm had moved up into southeastern Virginia. And I must be honest with you folks, when you're new in your career and you are telling people that there could be a major negative weather event, and nothing, little or nothing happens, it's not that you want something bad to happen, but you're worried about your credibility, okay? Because you're new in the business, and you know, people are saying, well, gosh, he said this was going to be really bad and nothing happened, okay? So you got to be careful about those types of things. Well, about 9 o'clock that evening, we had no reports of anything that was even remotely bad. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, I've blown this out of proportion. I've lost all my credibility. This is not good. And then I get up the next morning, and there are 57 people dead. So I go from thinking that I blew it out of proportion to thinking that I didn't do enough. Just that fast over about a 12-hour period. And we'll never forget it. We'll never forget it. And I'm glad that we were able to work with the National Weather Service to maybe get some warnings out to some folks that wouldn't have gotten them otherwise. But obviously, with the number of fatalities that occurred, 42 in North Carolina, 15 in South Carolina, it just wasn't enough. And so that was a very educational event for me from a scientific standpoint, but also a very, what would I say, or I guess a very tragic story from a personal human standpoint, to be able to see something like that evolve and then actually see the damage afterwards and see how bad it was. All right, I'm going to try to get a hold of myself here, and that is the bonus weather video for this Thursday, so we won't have one tomorrow. That is the bonus weather video for this Thursday, as I said. The next one will be coming up on Monday, and the daily weather update will be coming up shortly. So you all take care, folks, and we'll talk to you soon. See you later.